The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the Riverdale County Courthouse, as Officer James Mercer climbed them for what must have been the 10,000th time. At 43, his once sharp uniform now stretched a bit too tight across his middle, but the gleam of his badge remained immaculate. He polished it each morning, a ritual as important to him as his coffee. Inside, the familiar buzz of the metal detector greeted him as he nodded to the security team. They weren't his friends exactly, but they respected the invisible line he'd drawn. 15 years working court detail had taught James the value of boundaries, especially when those boundaries kept others at arm's length while he operated how he pleased. "Morning." "Jim," called out Donna from behind the clerk's desk. Her reading glasses hung from a beaded chain, swinging slightly as she sorted through the day's caseload. "Looks like Judge Patterson's got a full docket today," James grunted in acknowledgement. Judge Patterson was his favorite, older, tired, and most importantly trusting of James's instincts about defendants. Those instincts had become quite the useful tool over the years. "Anything interesting?" he asked, leaning against the counter and drumming his fingers on the polished wood. Donna slid a stack of folders toward him. "The usual. Some traffic violations, a couple of petty thefts, one drunk and disorderly from the weekend." James flipped through them, pausing occasionally to read a name or note. Each folder represented a person who would walk through those doors today, nervous and uncertain. And each person would look to him, the uniform, the badge, as the first face of authority they'd encounter. He smiled at the thought. By 10 o'clock, the hallway outside Courtroom B had filled with anxious people. Some sat straight-backed on the wooden benches, others paced, checking watches or phones. James watched them all from his position by the courtroom door, cataloging their behavior in his mental filing system. The nervous ones were his favorite, the ones who couldn't meet his eyes, who fidgeted with their paperwork, who looked like they might be sick right there on the polished floor tiles. Those were the ones who'd believe anything he told them. "Excuse me, officer?" A young man approached, clutching a crumpled ticket. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept well. His clothes were clean but worn at the edges. Working class, James assessed. Probably couldn't afford much of a fine. Perfect. What? James didn't bother softening his tone. This is my first time in court." The man's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not sure what to expect." James straightened, using his height to full advantage. "It's pretty simple. When they call your name, you go in, you show respect, and you don't waste the judge's time." He paused, then added, "Judge Patterson doesn't like excuses. Just yes, sir, no, sir, and take whatever comes your way." It wasn't entirely untrue. Judge Patterson did prefer efficiency. But what James didn't mention was that the judge was also fair, often reducing fines for first-time offenders or offering payment plans to those who asked. The young man swallowed hard. "Do you think there's any chance of getting this reduced? I really can't afford—" "Look," James cut him off, lowering his voice and leaning in slightly. "Between you and me, the system works a certain way. People who come in with the right attitude tend to have better outcomes. People who cause problems—" He let the sentence hang unfinished. The implied threat worked. The young man nodded quickly, backing away. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." James watched him retreat to a bench, now even more visibly shaken. Another small victory in a day that would likely hold many. Court officers weren't supposed to offer legal advice or predict outcomes. They weren't supposed to intimidate or mislead. The training manual was very clear on these points. But James had long ago decided that some rules were flexible, especially when no one was watching too closely, and no one ever did. Lunchtime came and went. James ate his turkey sandwich in the break room, half listening to the chatter of the administrative staff. They discussed weekend plans, TV shows, and the upcoming town festival. Normal people with normal lives. Sometimes he wondered what that might be like, to care about such ordinary things. But then again, normal people didn't have what he had. Power. Small, yes, but real. The ability to make someone's day better or worse with just a few words. The respect or fear that came with the uniform. "Back to the circus," he announced to no one in particular, tossing his sandwich wrapper in the trash and heading back to his post. The afternoon session began with a string of traffic violations. James called each name from his list, ushering people into the courtroom one by one. Most cases took only minutes, a plea, a fine, next case. the machinery of justice well-oiled and efficient until he called Lee Walker. A middle-aged woman stood up, her face a mask of determination as she gathered her paperwork. Something about her bothered James immediately. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't intimidated. And that slight smile, what did she have to smile about in traffic court? He stopped her at the door with a raised hand. "First time in court, ma'am?" "No," she answered simply, meeting his gaze directly. Her response threw him off balance. Most people elaborated, explained, overshared out of anxiety. "Well, just so you know, Judge Patterson runs a tight ship. Best behavior in there," she nodded politely. "I'm sure the judge is very professional." The emphasis on judge was subtle but clear. She was drawing a distinction between the judge and him. James felt a flicker of annoyance. "What's your violation?" he asked, though he could have just looked at his list. "Allegedly running a stop sign on Maple Street." The word allegedly hung in the air between them. "Got proof you didn't?" James tried to sound bored, disinterested. "Video from my dashboard camera." Again, that slight smile. "Technology can be quite helpful these days, don't you think, officer?" Before he could respond, she had slipped past him into the courtroom. James stood there for a moment, unsettled. Most people took his word as gospel. Most people believed that fighting the system was useless. Most people didn't come prepared. 10 minutes later, she emerged with her case dismissed. As she passed him, she paused. "Have a nice day, officer," she said pleasantly. Nothing in her tone suggested triumph, but James felt the sting of it anyway. That evening, as the courthouse emptied and the lights dimmed in the hallways, James sat at his desk finishing paperwork. The encounter with Lee Walker still nagged at him. It wasn't the first time someone had beaten a ticket, of course. But something about her confidence, her preparation, made him uneasy. People weren't supposed to come to court ready to fight. They were supposed to come ready to plead guilty and pay their fines. They were supposed to believe that the system, that he, was always right. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor. "Need more revenue this month." "County budget's tight," James sighed. The unspoken directive was clear. More tickets meant more fines, meant more money for the county, and that meant he'd need to get creative with his reports again. He pulled up the DMV database on his computer, scrolling through local addresses. The practice wasn't strictly legal, but it was effective. Find people who wouldn't or couldn't fight back, issue citations for violations that would be hard to disprove without evidence, and watch the guilty pleas roll in. His finger stopped on a name, Elena Cortez. No previous violations, clean record. Address in the nice part of town, but not too nice. Not the kind of neighborhood where people had connections to the mayor or police chief. Perfect. He filled out the citation form, inventing a rolling stop at the corner of 5th and Main, dated it for yesterday. She would receive the summons in the mail within the week, and like most people, she would probably just pay the fine rather than take a day off work to fight it. As James signed his name to the false document, he felt not even a twinge of guilt. This was just how things worked. His badge gave him the authority to define reality as he saw fit. Who would question it? He locked the citation in the outgoing mail drawer and gathered his things to leave. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. More nervous defendants, more easy intimidation, more small exercises of power. James Mercer patted his badge one last time before heading out into the night, completely unaware that he had just set in motion the beginning of his own downfall. Elena Cortez's day had already gone sideways before she even opened her mailbox. Her coffee maker had quit mid-brew, leaving her with half a cup of lukewarm disappointment. Her car had made that worrying clicking sound again when she started it. And her boss had emailed at 5 a.m. with yet another urgent project that somehow hadn't been urgent last week. So when she pulled the official-looking envelope from her mailbox that evening, she almost tossed it onto her growing pile of deal-with-it-later mail. Almost. But something, the county seal, maybe, or just the weight of the paper, made her open it on the spot. "You have been cited for failure to stop at a stop sign," she read aloud to her empty front porch. "Corner of 5th and Main, Tuesday, April 14th at 2:35 p.m. Elena frowned, flipping the paper over as if answers might be written on the back. April 14th? That was yesterday. But at 2:35 she hadn't been anywhere near 5th and Main. She'd been... Her frown deepened as she pushed open her front door, kicking off her shoes and heading straight to her home office. She dropped her bag on the floor and woke her computer, quickly opening her calendar. Tuesday, April 14th. There it was in black and white. Mom's surgery, Memorial Hospital. Elena sat back in her chair, the citation still clutched in her hand. She'd taken a personal day to drive her mother to the hospital in Springfield, over an hour away. They'd arrived at 9 a.m. for pre-op, and she hadn't left until nearly 6 that evening. When her mother was settled in recovery, there was absolutely no way she'd been running a stop sign in Riverdale at 2:35 p.m. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, reaching for her phone. She scrolled through her photos from that day. There were several, including one of her mother in her hospital gown, time-stamped 2:17 p.m., and another of the hospital cafeteria coffee she'd been drinking at 2:40. She even had her parking ticket from the hospital garage, showing her arrival at 8:52 a.m. and departure at 5:47 p.m. The evidence was clear. This ticket was a mistake at best, or something more troubling at worst. Elena had spent 7 years as a prosecutor before moving to private practice. She knew how the system worked and sometimes how it didn't work. She'd seen tickets issued to fill quotas. She'd seen officers cut corners. She'd prosecuted some of those officers herself, but that was in the city, not here in small-town Riverdale, where she'd moved just 8 months ago to start fresh. To slow down, to help her mother through her health problems. So much for small-town charm. She read the citation again more carefully. Officer James Mercer, court date set for May 10th, 2 weeks away. She made a mental note to look up this Officer Mercer, then added the court date to her calendar. Most people would probably just pay the fine, $120 plus processing fees. It would be easier, certainly. But easy wasn't Elena's way, especially not when something felt wrong, and this definitely felt wrong. The next morning, Elena arrived at work early, determined to clear some tasks before diving into research on her ticket. As a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases at the town's only nonprofit legal center, her desk was perpetually buried under case files of people who couldn't afford traditional legal help. "Morning, sunshine," called Vivian, the office manager, as Elena passed her desk. "You're in early." Elena waved her coffee mug in greeting. "Got a weird ticket in the mail. Wanted to clear my schedule so I could look into it." "Ticket? You?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Miss drives like my grandmother got a ticket?" "For running a stop sign I wasn't even in town to run," Elena replied, continuing to her office. "Something's fishy. Want me to run a background on the officer?" Vivian called after her. The woman had connections everywhere and a talent for finding information that bordered on supernatural. Elena paused. "Actually, yes. James Mercer. Works for the county courthouse detail, I think." Vivian's fingers were already flying over her keyboard. On it. By lunchtime, Elena had cleared her morning meetings and finally had a moment to review what Vivian had found. It wasn't much, but it was interesting. Officer James Mercer. 15 years with the county, the last 12 assigned to the courthouse. No official complaints in his file, at least none that were public record. But there were whispers on local social media groups, comments about his attitude, his selective enforcement, his tendency to give certain people a hard time while letting others slide. Nothing concrete. Nothing actionable. Just smoke that hinted at fire. Elena drummed her fingers on her desk, thinking. On impulse, she posted a question to the town's community forum. Has anyone had experiences with Officer Mercer at the courthouse? Working on a project and would appreciate insights. Then she got back to her actual paying work, pushing the ticket to the back of her mind until her phone buzzed an hour later. And then again? And again. By the end of the workday, her innocuous post had generated over 30 responses, with more still coming in. She read them on her drive home, sitting in her car in the driveway as the sun began to set. Officer Mercer told me I'd get a better outcome if I showed the proper respect. Felt like he was asking for something more. Got a ticket for parking violation when my car was in the shop that day. Mercer was the officer. Cheaper to pay than fight it. My daughter got a citation for being on her phone while driving. She doesn't own a cell phone. Post after post described similar experiences. Citations for violations that seemed invented. Intimidation tactics, suggestions that cooperation would lead to better outcomes. Several people mentioned that they'd simply paid their fines rather than take time off work to contest them. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern. The next day, she filed a formal records request with the county clerk's office for data on citations issued by Officer Mercer over the past 3 years. Then she called her mother. "How are you feeling, Mom?" she asked when her mother picked up. "Like someone cut me open and messed around with my insides," her mother answered dryly. "But the doctor says I'm healing nicely." "Why, you sound distracted," Elena sighed. "I got a ticket for running a stop sign at a time when I was sitting in the hospital with you. I think something shady is going on with one of the court officers here." Her mother's laugh was soft but knowing. "And of course you're going to dig until you find out what, aren't you? Some things never change, even with a new address." "You raised me to stand up when something's wrong," Elena replied. "I did indeed. Just be careful, sweet pea. Small towns have long memories and short tempers." The warning stayed with Elena as she spent the next few days gathering information. The records request would take time to process, but there were other avenues to explore. She visited the intersection of 5th and Main, noting the position of traffic cameras and businesses that might have security footage. She spoke with more people who'd had run-ins with Officer Mercer, taking careful notes of their experiences. A pattern emerged. Mercer's targets were typically people new to town, people without connections, people who would find it difficult to take time off work to contest a citation. People like her, except for one crucial difference. She had the training and resources to fight back. 5 days before her court date, Elena received a thick envelope from the county clerk's office. The data she'd requested on Mercer's citation history. She spread the papers across her dining room table that evening, looking for patterns. The numbers told a story. Mercer issued significantly more citations toward the end of each month, just when the county would be tallying its revenue. His citation rate had increased steadily over the years, while the successful contest rate had dropped. Most tellingly, the majority of his citations went to people in moderate-income neighborhoods, people who could afford to pay a fine if they had to, but who might think twice about losing a day's wages to contest it. It was clever in a twisted way. Target the middle, not the rich who could easily fight back, not the poorest who couldn't pay anyway. Find the sweet spot where payment was the path of least resistance. Elena leaned back in her chair, mind racing. The evidence was compelling but still circumstantial. She needed something more concrete to prove that Mercer was deliberately falsifying citations. She reached for her phone and called Vivian. "I need a favor," she said when Vivian answered. "Something off the books." "Those are my favorite kind," Vivian replied, the smile evident in her voice. "What do you need?" "I need to know if anyone else got a citation from Officer Mercer for 5th and Main on April 14th, around the same time as mine." There was a pause. "That's unspecific and possibly not entirely legal for me to find out." "I know," Elena said quietly. "But it's important. If he's making up violations, there might be overlaps he didn't expect anyone to notice." Another pause, longer this time. "Give me a day or two." 2 days later, Elena had her answer. 3 other people had received citations for the same intersection, at times that overlapped or were impossibly close together. One man had been cited for running the same stop sign just 3 minutes after Elena's alleged violation. Unless Officer Mercer had the ability to be in 2 places at once, something was very wrong. As Elena prepared for her court date, she organized her evidence carefully. Hospital photos, parking receipt, timestamp data, the citation record showing the suspicious pattern. She wasn't just fighting her own ticket anymore, she was building a case. The night before her court appearance, Elena sat on her porch with a glass of wine, watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. Tomorrow she would come face to face with Officer Mercer. Tomorrow she would take the first step toward exposing whatever game he was playing. She thought about what her mother had said about small towns and their long memories. She'd moved to Riverdale looking for peace, for a simpler life. Instead, she'd found corruption hiding behind a badge. So much for slowing down, she murmured to herself, taking a sip of wine as the first stars appeared overhead. She was ready for court. What she wasn't ready for was how this case would soon consume her life, and threaten it. The Riverdale County Courthouse stood 3 stories tall, its red brick facade and white columns giving it the dignified appearance that small-town government buildings often strive for. To Elena, it looked both quaint and intimidating as she climbed the steps, leather briefcase in hand. She'd dressed carefully that morning, professional but not flashy. Navy blue pantsuit, Minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her outfit said competent without screaming lawyer. Experience had taught her that sometimes it was better to hold that card until needed. Inside, the courthouse bustled with morning activity. Elena followed the signs to traffic court, joining the stream of people heading toward courtroom B. Most looked nervous, clutching papers and checking phones. Elena felt their anxiety like a familiar perfume. She'd spent years in courtrooms, but as a prosecutor, not a defendant. The role reversal felt strange. She took a seat on a wooden bench in the hallway, setting her briefcase beside her. The corridor filled quickly as 9 a.m. approached. Elena studied the faces around her. Young, old, all races, all seemingly dreading what was to come. How many had legitimate violations? How many were like her, caught in Officer Mercer's web? The thought made her stomach tighten. A uniformed officer appeared at the courtroom door precisely at 9, and Elena knew immediately it was him. Officer James Mercer stood tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform pressed to perfection, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His face matched the photo she'd found online. Square jaw, close-cropped gray hair, eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He looked exactly like what he was supposed to be, a respected officer of the court. If Elena hadn't done her research, she might have been fooled. Mercer began calling names from a clipboard, checking people off as they identified themselves. Elena watched him work, noting how some people flinched when he looked their way, how others seemed eager to please him with quick responses and respectful nods. He wielded his authority like a comfortable weapon. Elena Cortez? She raised her hand slightly. Present. Mercer's eyes found her, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Was it her tone? Her calm demeanor? Whatever it was, she'd caught his attention. First time in traffic court? He asked, his voice carrying the fake concern of someone who didn't care about the answer. Yes, Elena replied simply, offering nothing more. He seemed to expect elaboration, and when none came, his eyes narrowed slightly. Make sure you turn off your phone before entering. Judge Patterson doesn't tolerate disruptions. Thank you for the tip, Elena said, keeping her voice neutral. Mercer moved on to the next name, but Elena caught him glancing back at her twice more before he finished his roll call. Good. Let him wonder. Let him worry. 30 minutes later, she was still waiting her turn when the courtroom door opened and a young woman emerged, wiping away tears. The woman hurried past without looking at anyone, but Elena heard her mumbling about points on her license and insurance rates. Another name was called, and an older man entered the courtroom. 5 minutes later, he too emerged, looking defeated. The assembly line of justice ground on. When her name was finally called, Elena gathered her materials and approached the courtroom door. Mercer stood like a gatekeeper, clipboard in hand. The judge is running through these pretty quick today, he said conversationally as she neared. Most folks are just pleading guilty and paying the fine. Saves everyone time. Elena met his gaze directly. I'm pleading not guilty. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, irritation, she couldn't quite tell. That's your right, he said, his tone suggesting it wasn't a wise choice. But the evidence is pretty clear. I personally observed you running that stop sign. Elena tilted her head slightly. That's interesting, Officer Mercer, considering I was in Springfield that day. At the hospital, with my mother. His expression didn't change, but she saw his fingers tighten around the clipboard. People often get confused about dates. The violation occurred on April 14th at 2:35 p.m., 5th and Main. I'm not confused at all, Elena replied calmly. I have time-stamped photos, a hospital parking receipt, and witnesses who can testify to my whereabouts. For just a second, uncertainty crossed his face. Then his professional mask slipped back into place. Well, you'll have your chance to present that to the judge. He pushed open the courtroom door. Good luck. The courtroom was smaller than Elena had expected, with just a few rows of seating, a simple wooden barrier, and the judge's bench raised slightly at the front. Judge Patterson, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, looked up as Elena entered. Elena Cortez? The judge asked, checking her docket. Yes, Your Honor. Elena approached the defendant's table and set down her briefcase. You're charged with failing to stop at a stop sign on April 14th. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Officer Mercer, please present the citation. Mercer stepped forward from his position near the door. His voice took on an official tone as he recited the details of the alleged violation. On April 14th at approximately 2:35 p.m., I observed a silver Honda Civic approach the stop sign at 5th and Main. The vehicle slowed but did not come to a complete stop before proceeding through the intersection. I initiated a traffic stop and identified the driver as Elena Cortez through her license and registration. Elena listened, amazed at how confidently he lied. There had been no traffic stop, no face-to-face interaction. The entire incident was fabricated from start to finish. "Thank you, officer," Judge Patterson said. "Ms. Cortez, do you have anything to say in your defense?" "Yes, Your Honor." Elena opened her briefcase. "I'd like to present evidence that I was not in Riverdale at the time of the alleged violation. I was at Memorial Hospital in Springfield with my mother, who was undergoing surgery." She approached the bench and handed over her carefully organized evidence: the hospital photos with timestamps, the parking garage receipt, her mother's discharge papers listing Elena as the responsible party taking her home. Judge Patterson reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at Officer Mercer. "Officer, do you have any response to this evidence?" Mercer stepped forward, his face a mask of professional concern. "Your Honor, while I respect Ms. Cortez's evidence, I can only testify to what I personally observed. Perhaps there's been a mix-up with the vehicle description or the license plate, but I stand by my citation. It was a clever pivot, not directly challenging her evidence, but suggesting a mistake rather than admitting to a fabrication. Elena wasn't having it. Your Honor, if I may?" When the judge nodded, Elena continued. "Officer Mercer didn't just cite the wrong vehicle. His citation specifically states that he pulled me over and verified my identity through my license. That couldn't have happened if I wasn't there." She paused, then added, "Furthermore, I've discovered through public records that Officer Mercer issued citations to 3 other individuals for the same violation at the same intersection within minutes of my alleged violation. Unless he can be in multiple places at once, something is clearly wrong with these citations." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Patterson's eyes narrowed as she looked from Elena to Officer Mercer and back again. "Is this true, Officer Mercer?" the judge asked, her voice sharp. Mercer's confident demeanor cracked slightly. I would need to review my records, Your Honor. It's possible there was a clerical error with the timestamps." 4 identical clerical errors?" Elena pressed. "At the same location?" Judge Patterson held up a hand. "That's enough, Ms. Cortez." She turned to Mercer. "Officer, I find it concerning that you can't account for these discrepancies." "Your Honor, with all due respect, Ms. Cortez is making accusations without proper context," Mercer said, his voice hardening. "I've served this court faithfully for 15 years, and I've been a prosecutor for 7, Elena said quietly. The revelation hung in the air. Judge Patterson's eyebrows rose again, and Mercer's face went still. "Former Assistant District Attorney in Springfield," Elena clarified. "I specialized in cases involving official misconduct." For the first time, she saw real worry in Mercer's eyes. He hadn't bothered to research her before issuing the citation. Why would he? She was just another name in the system, another source of revenue, another person who would probably pay the fine rather than fight. Except she wasn't. Judge Patterson sighed deeply, removing her reading glasses and pinching the bridge of her nose. "Given the evidence presented, I'm dismissing this citation." She looked at Elena. "Ms. Cortez, thank you for bringing these issues to the court's attention." Then she turned to Mercer, her expression hard. "Officer, I want a full report on all citations you've issued at that intersection for the past month. On my desk by tomorrow morning." "Yes, Your Honor," Mercer replied, his voice tight. As Elena gathered her materials, she felt Mercer's eyes burning into her back. When she turned to leave, she found him blocking her path near the door. "You've made a mistake," he said quietly, his voice pitched so only she could hear. "This isn't Springfield. Things work differently here." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "That's what I'm counting on, Officer Mercer. Small towns talk, and I've been hearing a lot about you." She stepped around him and walked out of the courtroom, her heart pounding despite her calm exterior. In the hallway, she noticed several people watching her with newfound interest. Word would spread. Questions would be asked, and Officer Mercer would know she wasn't done. As Elena descended the courthouse steps into the bright spring morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "How'd it go?" Elena typed back quickly. "Citation dismissed. But I'm just getting started." She looked back at the courthouse with its imposing facade and illusion of perfect justice. Behind those walls, Officer Mercer was probably already damage controlling, already thinking about how to minimize what had happened, already planning how to discredit her. Let him try. Elena hadn't come to Riverdale looking for a fight, but she'd found one anyway, and she didn't intend to back down. Not when she'd seen the faces of all those people in the hallway. People who didn't have her advantages, her training, her knowledge of how the system really worked and how it could be abused. As she walked to her car, Elena made a decision. This wasn't just about one false citation anymore. This was about a pattern of abuse, about power unchecked, about a system that had forgotten who it was meant to serve. The confrontation in the courtroom was just the beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and Officer James Mercer had no idea what was coming for him. News travels fast in small towns. By the time Elena arrived at work the morning after her court appearance, Vivian was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a knowing smile. "You're famous," Vivian announced, handing Elena a steaming mug. "3 people have already called the office asking if you'd look into their traffic tickets." Elena set down her bag and took the coffee gratefully. "How did they even know I work here?" "Like I said, you're famous." Vivian leaned against the doorframe of Elena's modest office. "Apparently Judge Patterson's clerk has a sister who works at the diner, who told everyone about the fancy lawyer who stood up to Officer Mercer." Elena sighed. She'd expected some fallout from the confrontation, but not quite so quickly. "I didn't stand up to him. I just proved I wasn't in town when he claimed to have pulled me over. Same difference to folks around here." Vivian took a sip of her own coffee. "So what's the plan? Are you really going after him?" It was a fair question. Elena had come to Riverdale for a quieter life, not to start a crusade against a corrupt court officer. But the faces of those people in the courthouse hallway kept appearing in her mind. People without her resources, her knowledge of the system. "I need more information," Elena said finally. "Solid evidence, not just patterns and coincidences." Vivian's smile widened. "Thought you might say that. That's why I took the liberty of setting up interviews with those 3 callers. First one's at 11. Elena blinked in surprise. "You scheduled interviews without asking me? Would you have said no?" "No, but—" "Exactly." Vivian checked her watch. "Better get through those emails. It's going to be a busy day." And it was. Between her regular caseload and the interviews Vivian had arranged, Elena barely had time to breathe. But by the end of the day, she had 3 more accounts of Officer Mercer's pattern of questionable citations, each following the same basic template. Alleged violations that would be difficult to disprove without specific evidence, often targeting newcomers to town or people without strong local connections. The next day brought more of the same. Word had spread, and now people were coming forward sharing stories that ranged from minor harassment to outright fabrication. Elena recorded each account carefully, looking for patterns, building a case piece by piece. By Friday, she had enough to justify a deeper investigation. She drafted a formal letter to the county prosecutor's office, requesting an official inquiry into Officer Mercer's conduct. The old Elena, City Elena, would have fired it off immediately. But small-town Elena was learning caution. Instead, she called her former colleague, District Attorney Thomas Wilson, back in Springfield. "Elena Cortez," he answered warmly. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Missing the big city already?" "Not exactly," Elena replied, settling back in her chair. "I need some advice on a delicate situation." She explained what she'd discovered about Officer Mercer, the pattern of false citations, and the growing evidence of misconduct. Thomas listened without interrupting, and she could almost picture him taking notes in his methodical way. "Sounds like you've got the makings of a solid case," he said when she finished. "But I'm guessing you haven't taken this to the local prosecutor yet?" "That's what I wanted to ask you about. I don't know the players here like I did back home. I don't know who's connected to who might tip off Mercer if I start making official noise." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Smart thinking. Small towns are different beasts. Let me make a few calls, see what I can find out about the Riverdale County Prosecutor's Office." Discreetly, of course. I'd appreciate that. In the meantime, Thomas added, document everything and watch your back. Officers like this Mercer character don't take kindly to being exposed. Elena thanked him and hung up, his warning echoing in her mind. She'd been so focused on gathering evidence that she hadn't fully considered the potential blowback. Mercer had power, connections, and 15 years of goodwill in the community. She was still the newcomer. That night, as she drove home, Elena noticed a police cruiser parked across from her house. Not a county vehicle like Mercer would drive, but a city police car. It could be coincidence. It could be routine patrol. But the hairs on the back of her neck stood up anyway. The cruiser was gone the next morning, but the unease remained. Elena found herself checking her rearview mirror more often as she drove to work, noticing when the same cars appeared behind her multiple times, wondering if she was being paranoid or prudent. 3 days later, Thomas called back. Got some intel for you, he said without preamble. Riverdale County Prosecutor is Roy Phillips. Been in office about 8 years. Generally plays things by the book from what I hear. And this is a big but, he's up for re-election this year and word is he's struggling with campaign funding. And, Helena prompted, sensing there was more. And the county's budget has been increasingly dependent on revenue from fines and court fees. Phillips might not be directly telling officers to write more tickets, but he's certainly not discouraging it either. Elena processed this information, so he might not be eager to investigate an officer who's bringing in reliable revenue. Exactly. But there's something else you should know. Phillips has a deputy prosecutor, Diane Chen. Word is she's the real straight arrow in that office. If you're going to approach anyone officially, she might be your best bet. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. Elena thanked Thomas and added Diane Chen to her mental list of potential allies. The next week passed in a blur of activity. More people came forward with stories about Officer Mercer, each one filling in another piece of the puzzle. Elena worked late into the evenings, building a comprehensive case file that would be impossible to ignore. She was so focused on her task that she almost missed the signs of escalation. First, it was just whispers. Clients mentioning that they'd heard Officer Mercer was telling people she had a vendetta against law enforcement, that she'd been fired from her previous job for unethical behavior. Small-town rumors easily dismissed but not easily forgotten. Then came the parking tickets. 3 in 1 week, all for dubious violations like tire more than 12 inches from curb or parked for 61 minutes in a 1-hour zone. None issued by Mercer directly, but all bearing the hallmarks of targeted harassment. He's getting nervous, Vivian observed as Elena tossed the latest ticket onto her desk. Good. Means you're getting close to something. Or it means he's escalating, Elena replied, rubbing her temples where a headache was forming. I need to move faster. That afternoon, she called Diane Chen's office and requested a meeting. To her surprise, Chen agreed to see her the very next day. The deputy prosecutor's office was small but meticulously organized, much like Chen herself. She was younger than Elena had expected, perhaps mid-30s, with a direct gaze and a no-nonsense manner that Elena immediately appreciated. I understand you have concerns about one of our court officers, Chen said after brief introductions. I'll be candid, Ms. Cortez. I've heard rumors about your investigation. Officer Mercer has friends in this building. Elena nodded, unsurprised. I figured as much. That's why I wanted to meet with you directly, to explain what I've found. She laid out the evidence methodically, the pattern of suspicious citations, the testimonies she'd gathered, the statistical anomalies in Mercer's ticket-writing habits. Chen listened without expression, occasionally making notes, asking pointed questions that told Elena she was taking this seriously. This is compelling, Chen said when Elena finished. Troubling, but compelling. I'll need copies of everything, of course. Of course. Elena handed over a flash drive. It's all there, including contact information for witnesses willing to testify if necessary. Chen took the drive, tapping it against her palm thoughtfully. You should know that pursuing this won't be easy. Mercer has been here a long time. People trust him, and the county relies on the revenue his citations generate. I understand, but what he's doing is wrong. It undermines the entire justice system. I agree. Chen's expression softened slightly. Look, I can't promise anything, but I'll review this material thoroughly. If it's as solid as it appears, I'll take it to the prosecutor myself. It was the best outcome Elena could have hoped for. She thanked Chen and left, feeling cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. That optimism lasted exactly 3 hours. Elena was preparing dinner when her phone rang. An unknown number. Hello? Ms. Cortez? The voice was male, unfamiliar. This is Detective Frank Rivera with the Riverdale Police Department. There's been a break-in at your office. Nothing appears to be stolen, but there's significant damage. We'd like you to come down and take a look. The legal center was a mess when she arrived. Papers scattered everywhere, furniture overturned, computers smashed. Vivian stood in the middle of it all, directing uniformed officers like a general commanding troops. They knew what they were looking for, Vivian said grimly when she spotted Elena. Your office got the worst of it. Elena pushed past yellow police tape to see for herself. Her stomach dropped. Her desk had been completely ransacked, drawers emptied onto the floor, her computer torn apart. Most telling of all, the locked cabinet where she'd kept her Mercer files had been pried open, the contents missing. Detective Rivera appeared at her side. Any idea what they might have been after? Elena hesitated. Until she knew who she could trust, caution seemed wise. Client files, maybe. We handle sensitive cases. Rivera nodded, making a note. We'll dust for prints, but honestly, this looks professional. Probably won't find much. As Elena surveyed the damage, her phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Back off or next time it won't be just your office. She stared at the message, her hand trembling slightly. There was no signature, no identification. But she knew. Just as she knew that showing the message to Detective Rivera would accomplish nothing. This was Mercer's response to her meeting with Chen. He had sources everywhere, eyes and ears throughout the courthouse. And now he was escalating from rumors and parking tickets to outright intimidation. Elena slipped her phone back into her pocket without showing anyone the message. This changed things. This was no longer just about false citations and abused authority. This was about criminal behavior, about a man so secure in his power that he thought he could threaten a former prosecutor and get away with it. As she helped Vivian salvage what they could from the wreckage of their office, Elena's resolve hardened. Mercer had made a critical error. He'd assumed that his intimidation tactics would frighten her into backing down. He didn't understand who he was dealing with. That night, Elena sat at her kitchen table with a fresh notebook, starting from scratch. Her carefully built case file might be gone, but her determination wasn't. She would rebuild the case stronger this time, and she would add new charges: witness intimidation, destruction of property, criminal threats. Officer James Mercer had thought his badge made him untouchable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The break-in at the legal center made the front page of the Riverdale Gazette. Local nonprofit targeted, the headline declared, alongside a photo of Elena and Vivian standing amid the wreckage of their office. The article mentioned the suspicious timing of the incident, coming just as the center was reportedly investigating allegations of misconduct within the county court system. No names were mentioned, but everyone in town knew who they meant. Elena hadn't spoken to the reporter, but Vivian had. Public pressure is our best protection now, she'd explained. The more people who know what's happening, the harder it'll be for them to sweep it under the rug. Elena wasn't so sure. As she sat in her temporary workspace, a corner table at the local library, she felt more exposed than protected. People kept glancing her way, whispering behind their hands. Was it support? Curiosity? Or were they deciding she was making trouble, rocking the boat, questioning a system they'd all accepted? Her phone rang, breaking her concentration. Deputy Prosecutor Diane Chen. I heard about the break-in, Chen said without preamble. Are you all right? We're managing, Elena replied. But all my evidence against Mercer is gone. There was a pause. That's convenient. Too convenient. I agree. Chen's voice dropped lower. Look, I don't have the authority to launch a formal investigation without the prosecutor's approval, and Phillips is dragging his feet. But the police report on the break-in gives me an opening. I can request security footage from businesses near your office, interview potential witnesses, all standard procedure for investigating a burglary. Elena sat up straighter. And if that investigation happens to uncover evidence related to Mercer? Exactly. I'll need to move carefully, but it's a start. After they hung up, Elena felt a renewed sense of hope. Chen was taking a professional risk by helping her. especially given the prosecutor's reluctance. It meant Elena wasn't alone in this fight. She spent the rest of the day rebuilding her case file from memory, contacting witnesses again, asking them to resubmit their statements. Most agreed readily. Some seemed nervous now, aware of the break-in, afraid of becoming targets themselves. Elena couldn't blame them. That evening, as she walked to her car in the library parking lot, she noticed a county vehicle idling across the street. Not trying to hide, not attempting to be subtle, just there making sure she saw it, making sure she knew she was being watched. Elena took a photo of the vehicle with her phone, then got into her car and drove home, checking her rearview mirror the entire way. The county car didn't follow, but the message had been delivered. Two could play at that game. The next morning, Elena went to the courthouse, not to file paperwork or attend a hearing, but simply to sit in the public gallery, notebook in hand, watching Officer Mercer as he went about his duties. She took notes openly, recording the time whenever he spoke to defendants, observing his body language, his tone, the subtle intimidation tactics she'd experienced firsthand. It took him less than an hour to notice her. His eyes widened briefly in surprise, then narrowed in suspicion. Elena smiled pleasantly and continued writing in her notebook. By lunchtime, Mercer was visibly rattled. He kept glancing her way, fumbling his words during roll call, standing too close to defendants as if asserting his authority. Elena stayed until the court recessed for lunch, then left as quietly as she'd come. She repeated this exercise the next day. And the next, never speaking, never causing a disturbance, just watching and taking notes. It was perfectly legal. Court was open to the public and perfectly maddening for Officer Mercer. On the fourth day, he finally broke. "What do you want?" he demanded, cornering her in the hallway as she was leaving. His voice was low, but his face was flushed with anger. Elena maintained her composure. "Justice, Officer Mercer. That's all? You're interfering with court operations. Intimidating an officer, am I?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "I'm simply observing public proceedings, exercising my civic interest in our judicial system. Writing things down helps me remember the details." His jaw tightened. "This vendetta of yours is going to backfire. You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I think I do." Elena took a deliberate step toward him, lowering her voice. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A bully with a badge who thought he could threaten me, destroy my property, and get away with it. You're used to scaring people into submission, but that won't work with me." Mercer's face darkened. "You can't prove anything." "Not yet," Elena agreed. "But I will. And when I do, that badge won't protect you." She walked away, heart pounding but stride steady. She hadn't planned the confrontation, but now that it had happened, she felt strangely liberated. The pretense was gone. The battle lines were drawn. What she didn't expect was for Mercer to escalate so quickly and so recklessly. The next morning, Elena was awakened by pounding on her front door. When she opened it, still in her pajamas and robe, she found two uniformed police officers on her porch. "Elena Cortez," one asked, his expression grim. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Elena blinked in confusion. "Arrest for what?" "Possession of controlled substances with intent to distribute. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." It was so absurd that Elena almost laughed. "This is ridiculous. I don't have any drugs. Ma'am, we have information from a confidential informant that you're storing illegal prescription medications in your home for distribution. We have a warrant to search the premises." As the officer cuffed her, Elena's mind raced. This was Mercer's doing, it had to be. A false tip, a rushed warrant, a planted stash of pills. She'd seen this tactic before as a prosecutor, usually against gang members or drug dealers, not former assistant district attorneys. "I want to call my lawyer," she said as they led her to the police car. "And I want the search of my home recorded. Every minute of it." The officers exchanged glances but didn't respond. As they placed her in the back seat, Elena caught sight of her neighbors watching from their windows and porches. The public humiliation was part of the plan, she realized. Discredit her, destroy her reputation, make her look like the criminal instead of Mercer. At the police station, Elena was photographed, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. They took her phone, but not before she managed to send a quick text to Vivian. "Arrested. Bogus drug charge. Call Thomas Wilson in Springfield ASAP." Hours passed. Elena sat on the hard bench, watching the clock on the wall tick away minutes that felt like hours. She knew the process, how long booking took, how the system deliberately moved slowly to wear down the accused. She also knew her rights, and she exercised them, refusing to answer questions without her lawyer present. Finally, nearly 4 hours after her arrest, a familiar face appeared at the cell door. Deputy Prosecutor Diane Chen, looking both angry and determined. "They're releasing you," Chen said as an officer unlocked the cell. "The warrant has been revoked." Elena stood, relief washing over her. "What happened?" "What happened is that Officer Mercer made a serious miscalculation. The confidential informant he used to secure the warrant doesn't exist, and the judge who signed off on it is furious about being misled." In the station's front office, Elena found not only Vivian waiting for her, but also Thomas Wilson, who had driven all the way from Springfield. "Your friend here called me," Thomas explained, putting a protective arm around her shoulders. "Said you needed the big guns. I brought a whole legal team with me." As they walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, Elena felt both exhausted and energized. Mercer just made his biggest mistake, didn't he? "Monumental," Thomas agreed. "Falsifying information for a search warrant is a felony. Using his position to target you because of your investigation? That's official misconduct, witness intimidation, civil rights violations, the list goes on." "And we can prove it," Chen added, joining them outside. "The judge wants a full investigation into how this warrant was obtained. I'll be leading it personally, with the prosecutor's full blessing. Phillips can't ignore this anymore. It's too public, too egregious." Within days, the investigation had expanded far beyond the false warrant. With Thomas Wilson's legal team assisting, they uncovered a pattern of abuse stretching back years. Other officers came forward, describing how Mercer had pressured them to meet ticket quotas. Court clerks admitted to witnessing his intimidation tactics. Even Judge Patterson provided a statement, detailing her growing concerns about the number of contested citations from Mercer that fell apart under scrutiny. The final blow came from an unexpected source. A young officer who worked alongside Mercer produced text messages showing Mercer had orchestrated the break-in at the legal center, using his connections with former officers now working private security. 2 weeks after her arrest, Elena sat in the district attorney's office alongside Thomas, Chen, and Prosecutor Phillips, reviewing the mountain of evidence against Officer James Mercer. "We're filing criminal charges," Phillips announced, looking uncomfortable but resigned. "Multiple felony counts including falsifying official documents, evidence tampering, abuse of authority, and obstruction of justice." "And the civil rights violations?" Thomas pressed. Phillips nodded reluctantly. "Those too. The FBI has opened their own investigation based on the pattern of conduct." As they left the meeting, Chen pulled Elena aside. "I owe you an apology. I should have acted sooner before it got to this point." Elena shook her head. "You acted when it mattered most. That's what counts." The arrest of Officer James Mercer made headlines beyond Riverdale. The story of a court officer who falsified citations to meet quotas, then tried to frame the lawyer who exposed him, captured public attention across the state. More victims came forward, and the investigation expanded to include other officers and court officials. 1 month later, Elena stood on the courthouse steps addressing a crowd of reporters and community members. The county had just announced a comprehensive reform of its court procedures, including new oversight for officers, a review of all contested citations from the past 5 years, and the creation of a civilian review board. "This isn't about one bad officer," Elena told the crowd. "It's about a system that allowed abuse to flourish unchecked. It's about what happens when we prioritize revenue over justice. When we forget that every citation, every fine, every court appearance affects real people's lives." She looked out at the faces watching her, some she recognized from her investigation, people who had suffered under Mercer's corrupt practices. Others were simply concerned citizens, awakened to problems they hadn't known existed in their community. "The badge is a symbol of public trust," Elena continued. "When that trust is broken, we all suffer. But when we stand up together to restore it, we all benefit." As she concluded her remarks, Elena caught sight of a familiar figure being led down the courthouse steps in handcuffs. Officer James Mercer, no longer in uniform, head bowed, escorted by the FBI agents who had come to take him into federal custody. Their eyes met briefly. In his, Elena saw not the arrogant authority figure who had threatened her, but a man who had finally realized his badge couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions. In that moment, Elena thought of her mother's words. Small towns have long memories and short tempers. Riverdale would remember this chapter for years to come. The officer who thought his badge made him untouchable, and the woman who proved him wrong. As Mercer was placed in the waiting FBI vehicle, Elena turned away. Her work here wasn't finished. The system needed rebuilding, trust needed restoring, and there were other Officer Mercers out there, in other courthouses, thinking their badges placed them above the law. But for today, justice had prevailed, and that was enough.